Not every hero wears a cape. And sometimes the bravest acts happen far from cameras, without applause, without headlines. It's easy to admire someone who runs into danger, but no one talks about the weight that lingers after the flames are gone. The truth is, most people think saving a life is where the story ends, when in reality, that's just the beginning. In a country where we celebrate winners and glorify spotlight moments, we often overlook the quiet strength of those who carry invisible scars. Jack wasn't famous. He wasn't a politician or a celebrity. He was just a regular firefighter in a quiet town, driven by something stronger than fear. But one day, everything changed. And it wasn't just because of the fire. It was because of the truth that came after it. This isn't just a story about a rescue. It's about pain, transformation, and emotional survival. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the real fire burns inside us. But more than that, it's an invitation to rethink what strength really means, and to finally understand that the greatest victories are born from chaos. That morning, the town felt wrapped in a warm spring hug. Trees swayed gently like they were still dreaming, and the scent of fresh coffee drifted through open windows of old houses. It was a kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and more importantly, by heart. The streets, quiet and slow, move at their own rhythm, like they were keeping a secret with time. And in that stillness, something began to stir. A whisper, a warning, a spark. Across town, Jack McCullen tightened the strap on his orange helmet and finished the last sip of his coffee. 23 years on the force, and his face told 1,000 stories, some noble, some painful. He knew better than most. Firefighting wasn't just about hoses and ladders. It was about heart, about running into places most people were desperate to escape. He'd seen floods, crashes, buildings come down, but fire was different. Fire didn't just destroy. It revealed. In the garage, the radio crackled to life with a tone Jack didn't like. Code red on Jefferson Street, residential fire. He didn't blink. His body moved before his thoughts could catch up. Adrenaline wasn't new. It was part of the job. But something about the way that smoke started rising over the rooftops didn't sit right. Thick, black, angry. This wasn't your average kitchen fire. Jack climbed into the truck like he had a date with fate, unaware that this call was about to change everything. Jefferson Street looked like the hallway to hell. Flames had already devoured the first floor and were crawling up the second like wild beasts, bursting from windows in furious waves. Neighbors stood helplessly on the sidewalks, shouting, crying, unable to look away. Somewhere in the chaos, a baby's cries pierced the air, faint, desperate. Jack jumped off the truck with his eyes locked on the house. And in that split second, he knew this wasn't going to be a routine rescue. A man dropped to his knees, screaming, pointing toward the house. "My wife, my baby, they're still in there." Before the sentence was finished, Jack was already moving. Seconds mattered. Each one carried the weight of 2 lives. He pulled the mask down over his face, gripped the axe tight, and charged through the door swallowed by smoke. The heat was unbearable, but it wasn't the fire that haunted him. It was the silence, that dreadful silence that always came before the scream. Inside, it was a war zone. Walls cracking, the ceiling threatening to collapse, smoke swallowing every corner. Jack crawled, felt with his hands, listened with everything he had. Then movement, a faint shadow on the floor. A woman, unconscious, arms curled protectively around a baby. The child let out a soft whimper, the sound of life begging not to be forgotten. Jack wrapped him in a thermal blanket, lifted them both, and ran toward the fire he had just come from. But something in the woman's face stuck with him. A look frozen in time, not fear, not pain, something else. Something he wouldn't understand until much later. With the woman limp in one arm and the baby pressed to his chest, Jack didn't have the luxury of thinking. The fire was everywhere now, crawling the walls, crashing down in sheets of flame. He moved by instinct, every step a gamble against time. It felt like running through a tunnel that kept collapsing behind him. There was no guarantee he'd make it out, but that never mattered. Not to Jack. Not when someone else's life hung in the balance. Midway through the hallway, an explosion rocked the back of the house, throwing him against the wall. Smoke thickened instantly, a suffocating blackness that swallowed the last bits of visibility. Jack held his breath, counted to 3, and pushed forward. The baby's soft cough was his compass. The woman's weight on his shoulder was a reminder that he couldn't afford to fail. He wasn't just walking through fire. He was walking through the line between life and death, and both were trying to pull him in. When he finally burst through the front door, everything stopped. Neighbors froze. Firefighters rushed. The man from earlier collapsed in tears. Jack still held them both, arms trembling, heart pounding, eyes scanning for danger even outside the flames. But even as his boots hit solid ground, something inside him stayed back in that house. There was a change in the air, in him, in everything. And though he couldn't explain it, Jack knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the same man who'd walked into that fire. And maybe he never would be again. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and tension. Jack sat quietly in the hallway, still in his soot-covered gear, hands trembling slightly, eyes locked on the emergency room doors. The woman, her name was Emily, he'd learned, was in critical condition. The baby, miraculously, had only mild smoke inhalation, but Jack wasn't celebrating. Something about this rescue didn't sit right. It wasn't just the danger or the heat. It was the way she looked at him before passing out, like she already knew something he didn't. A nurse approached with something in her hand. "She dropped this before we brought her in," she said, handing over a photo. It was old, faded, the kind people keep in wallets. A man smiling next to Emily and the baby. But it wasn't the same man Jack saw crying outside the burning house. His heart sank. Coincidence? Or was there something darker under the ashes? Jack pocketed the photo without a word. Some truths don't announce themselves. They just arrive quietly and wait for you to notice. That night, Jack lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by more than fire. He replayed the rescue like a movie stuck on loop. The smoke, the heat, the baby's cry, the photo. Something didn't add up. He'd seen a lot in his career, but this was different. He didn't have a badge or a reason to go digging, but his gut wouldn't let go. He didn't need fire gear to feel the heat. Something about that house was still burning. And deep down, Jack knew he was going to have to go back. 2 days later, Jack found himself back on Jefferson Street. Not because of orders, not because of routine, but because something inside him wouldn't let it go. The house was a skeleton now. Charred wood, cracked brick, windows blown out like eyes that had seen too much. But the air still smelled of smoke and something else, something unresolved. Neighbors watched him from behind curtains, lips tight. When fear speaks through silence, it's usually hiding something loud. An older woman from next door stepped out and waved him over. "There's something you should know," she said, voice low, cautious. She spoke of shouting matches, slammed doors, and crying that didn't stop when the firemen left. The man who'd cried on the sidewalk? Not her husband, not the baby's father. He said he was taking care of them, she whispered, but it always felt more like control. Jack listened. He'd heard stories like this before, too many. And suddenly, the fire didn't seem like the main story anymore. Later that afternoon, Jack quietly passed what he'd learned to a friend in the local police department. It turned out there was already a case being built. Suspicions of abuse, maybe even forced isolation. The fire may have been the final act of a tragedy that had been playing out in silence for months, maybe years. Jack hadn't just saved lives. He'd walked straight into the wreckage of something much deeper. And unknowingly, he'd lit the match that exposed it all. The media called him a hero. His photo ran in the local paper, and strangers stopped him to say thank you. But Jack felt hollow. Every time he closed his eyes, the fire played back in slow motion. The sound of the baby coughing, the woman's lifeless body, the explosion. On the outside, he was a strong one, the rescuer. But on the inside, something was splintering. The fire hadn't just scorched the house. It had burned through parts of him that no one else could see. He began showing up earlier to the station and leaving later, avoiding conversations that weren't strictly about work. People tried to celebrate him, but he wasn't in the mood for praise. Instead of pride, he carried guilt, not because he'd failed, but because he hadn't seen the warning signs sooner. He'd rescued her from the fire, yes. But what about all the days before that? The hidden bruises, the silent cries? Trauma, he realized, doesn't need flames to spread. One evening, a veteran colleague pulled him aside in the locker room. She didn't say much, just let him talk. When he finished, she looked him in the eye and said, "You saved them, but you forgot to save yourself." Those words stuck. Maybe the strongest thing he could do now wasn't to run into another burning building, but to face the one inside him. That night, Jack booked his first therapy session, not because he was weak, but because healing is also heroic. It took months before Jack could sleep without waking up in a sweat. He stuck with therapy, started journaling, and slowly began to reconnect with himself. He realized that running into fire was easy compared to facing the pain that comes after. The fire had been an event. Trauma was a process. And rebuilding himself felt like rebuilding a house, brick by brick, with patient setbacks and scars. He wasn't trying to be who he was before. He was trying to become someone new. Emily survived. After days in a coma, she woke up. When Jack visited her at the hospital, the moment was quiet. No grand speeches, no drama. She held his hand and cried. That was enough. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own journey. She told him the truth. She'd been trying to escape for months. The man wasn't the baby's father. He was someone who controlled her, emotionally and physically. The fire was either a tragic accident or a desperate end to something already burning. Jack left the hospital feeling lighter, but not finished. He knew there were countless Emilys out there. And maybe his purpose wasn't just putting out fires. Maybe it was listening, really listening, to the stories no one else could hear. He started attending trauma support groups, speaking at local events, and for the first time in years, he felt that his pain had meaning. He wasn't just a firefighter anymore. He was someone who helped people rebuild the parts of themselves that no one else could see. As time went on, the story of the rescue spread beyond the town. News stations called. Magazines wanted interviews. Jack turned them all down, not out of pride, but clarity. He understood now. Real courage doesn't crave a spotlight. It lives in quiet places, in hospital hallways, in whispered confessions, in the way someone grips your hand and doesn't let go. Jack didn't want attention. He wanted purpose, and he had already found it. Back at the station, things changed, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in small, important ways. Fellow firefighters began confiding in him. They talked about calls that still haunted them, about the nightmares they never shared. Jack became more than a mentor. He became a safe place. Not someone with all the answers, but someone who didn't flinch when the truth showed up. The station became a little softer, a little more human, less bravado, more honesty. Emily's life changed, too. With help from social workers, she built a new beginning, legally protected, emotionally supported. One day, Jack got a letter from her. Not a thank you, but something deeper. She wrote about freedom, about reclaiming her voice, about raising her son in peace. She said Jack hadn't just pulled them from the fire. He'd ignited something inside her that no flame could touch. Hope. Jack read that letter on his porch, alone, with the evening sun warming his face. And in that quiet moment, he understood some rescues never make the news, but they change everything. Jack never looked at his uniform the same way again. It used to be just part of the job, something you put on, did your duty, and hung up at the end of the shift. But now it meant more. It symbolized sacrifice with no applause, battles fought in silence, the weight of people's stories resting on your shoulders. He started noticing things differently, the way someone avoided eye contact, the tension in their voice, the way pain hides in plain sight. His eyes had changed. So had his heart. At one of the talks he gave at a local community center, a teenage girl approached him afterward. "You saved me too," she said quietly. She wasn't talking about a fire. She was talking about her home, about control, fear, and the courage she found after hearing his story. Jack stood frozen for a second, unsure what to say. So he didn't speak. He hugged her. And in that hug, he realized that stories saved people in ways water hoses never could. His role had evolved. He wasn't just responding to emergencies anymore. He was helping people recognize their own. He started visiting high schools, talking to students about real courage, about listening to your gut, about walking away from what burns you, even when no one else sees the smoke. Jack became a bridge between survival and healing, not because he had all the answers, but because he asked the right questions. And in every classroom, every hallway, every whispered thank you, he saw the same truth. The world doesn't just need more firefighters. It needs more people willing to see, listen, and act, even when no one else does. Over time, Jack started to slow down. He didn't retire all at once, just ease out of chaos gradually. The younger crew took over the calls, while he focused on something deeper. His home became a kind of quiet refuge for stories. People, strangers, neighbors, fellow firefighters, would come just to talk, to sit, to breathe. He didn't offer advice like a guru. He just listened like someone who truly knew how hard life could hit. On rainy days, Jack would sit on his porch with a cup of coffee and Emily's letter folded beside him. He read it more times than he could count. Sometimes he'd get new pictures of the baby. Now a child, full of life, running, laughing, growing up free. Jack wasn't family. He wasn't a hero they'd write into a fairy tale, but he was part of the story. And that was enough. Not all impact needs a headline. Some of it lives quietly in the heart, unspoken but unforgettable. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. A teenage girl stood there, nervous but determined. "My mom said you saved us." It was her, the baby from the fire, now tall, strong, and standing in front of him with eyes full of history. Jack stared for a moment, the world going still around them. No words, just presence. And in that moment, everything made sense. The risk, the pain, the sleepless nights. She was here, alive, well, and free. Jack smiled, took a deep breath, and said, "You're a survivor, too. Don't ever forget that."